Hey guys, Adam here from BizNexus. I had the chance to sit down with Eric Owens from AppBusinessBrokers today. We dove into his unique perspectives on availability of financing, or lack thereof, for business acquisitions in the mobile app space, which is a niche that he's been helping to create for almost 20 years. We also dove into why filling the gap in this financing void could be such a great opportunity for savvy entrepreneurs moving forward. We actually stumbled into some great finds walking through Eric's bio and experience as a broker buying and selling mobile apps, like the fact that he completed the first SBA-backed acquisition in the space, and just how early he was in the sub-industry when he had to help create the market in the early 2000s and to push Apple to make changes to their app transfer process to facilitate this, and to figure out who the hell out there would actually want to buy a mobile app when he first started representing those types of deals for sellers. Really fascinating because he's been at this for as long as he has, and he really helped create a market which has absolutely exploded over the past 3-4 years. So I thought it was a really interesting conversation with Eric. Hope you think so too. Disclaimer from the always present legal team: podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework. All right. Eric Owens, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, appreciate it. So for those of you who haven't seen Eric on the podcast, Eric Owens with me is founder of AppBusinessBrokers.com. And you've been at this for a while. I mean, you've been specializing in brokering sale of mobile apps and internet-based businesses for, is it over 20 years?
Going on 18 now. So yeah.
Going on 18. All right. I don't want to show your age there. So let's say over 15 years experience owning, operating apps, internet businesses yourself, and clearly established your reputation in this niche for managing exits and acquisitions, specifically in the mobile app sector. Your practice runs through brokering, advertising, finding qualified buyers, negotiating, closing deals, full service, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're doing a little exit planning stuff for people too. So.
Yeah. So you guys have, and within this niche, so I think you've really become a leading firm over time with this a very narrowly defined niche for closing mobile app deals. And there are a lot of new players, but you've been around for a while, and that's kind of what we're going to dive into today. Is we're going to tap into your experience, that 18 years, to talk about the financing availability in this space, because that's a challenge that nobody would know anything about this until they get into it. So there are a lot of first-time acquirers out there going to get into it. They want to buy internet-based businesses, they want to buy apps, and then they discover that some of the traditional financing routes available in business acquisition aren't in this space. And you've got a unique perspective on that. Why don't I just kind of let you pop into your background and how you got into this space, and really your background in the app industry. I think we just start off and set context that way, if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, back it's like 2011. I'd been brokering internet business deals for a few years by then, and then had a young prospective client come to me with this mobile app. Like, I don't even know if I had a smartphone back then yet, and
a flip phone.
Yeah, exactly. And but he had this app and kind of had to harass me to listing it. It only had like a year of history. The whole app store itself was only about 2 years old. I frankly didn't think anyone would buy it because all the buyers back then wanted stuff that had 3 years of history. But this Chad Moretta was the guy. He kept hitting me up, and his revenue kept going up every month for this app. It went from like 20 grand a month to 40 grand a month. And then it hit 90 grand a month. And I was like, maybe there is something to these apps. So definitely credit Chad for being persistent and getting me to list it. And we listed that one for him, and I went to work on finding buyers. And like, lots of people we talked to thought we were crazy for trying to sell an app. They're like, what is this? It's not an established business. What do I do with this? How do I run it? But we did find a few buyers that saw the potential. The one who acquired it ended up being a young entrepreneur whose family had some oil money. So they did like oil royalty stuff. And he had some limited experience with apps, just kind of playing around with them, and saw the potential. And his family, he knew the power of M&A a little bit to make faster progress. So instead of like going and creating an app, he was like, I'll just buy one and use that as a starting point to launch other apps. So
this was somebody who didn't necessarily have a tech background, because you're talking about making a market, which is fascinating. So you were in there, you're trying to find buyers for this asset class that no one really understands, and you found somebody who understood the power of M&A, but they just didn't know much about apps at all. Like, how did you go about? Were you just was it a spray and pray strategy in terms of finding interested entrepreneurs or
Yeah, back then I had a small database built up of contacts that were looking for internet businesses. So started there and then just started networking through my contacts of kind of like getting this out in front of people. And that's where I got a lot of feedback from people that had like internet businesses that were like, this is crazy, like no one's gonna want to buy the app. But so it took us a little effort to, go find that and then to get the deal done. So we were pretty familiar with like the internet business process in terms of closing and doing all the transfers. The app stuff was brand new. And so it was a learning curve for everybody. So we kind of jumped through hoops there to get that. From what I know, is like the first private app sale acquisition deal, and ended up doing multiple other deals with that buyer and selling multiple other companies for Chad, this other client too since then. So.
But you're going through Apple's App Store, and so there was no real established app transfer process at this point, right?
Yeah, not at all. It was actually a huge hassle. Literally, the only way for people to get deals done back then to buy the app was to acquire the entity that owned the developer account. At the time, they didn't have like individual personal developer accounts you do now, but back then it was all company developer accounts. You needed a company entity set up, done a Brad Street number stuff, EIN, all that. And so literally the buyer had to acquire the whole company entity and then jump through the hoops of like getting themselves added to the company entity and bank accounts and then removing the previous owner because that was all hooked in with Apple, like almost like hard coded. It was just there. They had to take it over that way. It was a hassle. Some of the buyers we talked to, like they kind of looked at that and were like, man, the liability of buying an entity, there's extra issues with that. They weren't real comfortable with it. So I think it took a motivated seller to work through the stuff and a motivated buyer to jump through that. And then on the initial one, and then back, I think it was about 2 years, year and a half, 2 years after that, back in 2013, we had a very experienced business buyer from Australia that was buying a 7-figure portfolio through us. And one of his partners was a super smart attorney, and they didn't want to acquire the seller's entity because it was going to have like big tax ramifications for them. So it wasn't even an option on their end. It would have, killed the deal. But they really wanted to acquire the app. So they actually figured out a mechanism where instead of acquiring the whole seller's entity, that they could legally step into the existing developer contract with Apple and just acquire the assets. So didn't have to acquire the entity. They basically just stepped into the Apple developer contract and took it over that way. And then it took some battling though. Like Apple at first was like, no, you can't do that. And then, over time, actually going through Apple's legal team, they realized that it was legally valid, like that they wouldn't be able to challenge it. It wasn't like the buyer was going to take him to court or anything, but they definitely were, keeping things on Apple where they had to pay attention to them. So like, we're not going away. So
yeah. And were you battling? This was on the second transaction. On that first transaction, were you on the horn with Apple? Did you have contacts internally who you were working with to get that deal done, or was it just the second one where you really started making the contacts with the legal team and pushing that?
Yeah, just this other one. Before that, we actually closed multiple other app deals in between them. We just did it all entity style. So we just told all the buyers like, hey, this is the only way to do it. You have to acquire the entity. And then with this buyer, like I said, where they couldn't acquire the entity, they came up with this method where they could step into it. And then funny enough, like right after that, Apple created their current transfer process where now people can literally just transfer apps, one developer account to another, just a click of a button. So take sometimes minutes, hours at most. So
and was that based on that whole back and forth? Because you're in there as a broker, delivering the message to the legal team and trying to push this through. And I'm sure they're getting other similar requests along the way. Because it was 2013, you said?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So
they had to do some coding and stuff on their back end, of course, to make that happen. But yeah, right after that, they came out with their transfer process to easy for people to do.
Got it. And so you were a big part of creating that transfer process or pushing for something that would ultimately become the app transfer process, which helped to make the market. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it opened up the door for a lot more people to do deals where you remove any potential legal risk of entity or stock deals and just made it super simple, so people can just do asset transactions, buy the assets, transfer the app to a different developer account, and good to go. So
yeah, interesting.
Before that, I definitely took buyers who were familiar and comfortable with doing entity type of deals. So everyone else just kind of balked at it.
And so these buyers that you're working with up until this point, you had, the first app transaction you were talking about was, let's say, family wealth, oil wealth, and personal wealth. And then the second app, just one of these many Australians who are buying apps. They're all buying apps, man. They're all Australian. There's so many. And that was just financing that they already had. They didn't have to, as much as you're comfortable talking about it, how did they finance that deal?
Yeah, it was just their own personal cash where they had money where the main buyer, like they had sold a couple businesses before, had a winery. It was pretty much like a family fund that they were using to acquire it. So
yeah. And so getting to where we are today, right, where everybody who's a first-time acquirer or soon to be acquirer, soon to be first-time acquirer, they're out there doing these online boot camps, trying to get zero money down, and leaning heavily on financing. Maybe if you could just talk about like the financing picture, kind of what was available with financing. So if you didn't have the family wealth or committed capital fund and you needed to go the financing route, kind of what was available, and then maybe bleed into what's available now and what you think like where the gap is and what might be available going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Historically, like I guess it would end up being our first 9 years doing these deals. It was just all people with just their own personal cash or investors. Like that was it. There was no bank financing at all. So there really weren't many options for financing. People had to go pull together investor capital, their own personal capital to get the deals done. And
could you speak to why that is for someone who's not familiar with financing and how that works? I mean, for businesses, in terms of basing financing on assets and.
Oh, yeah. So like, nowadays people can get one of the most popular ones, especially for more e-commerce style businesses, was SBA funding. So, you can work with a banker that then gets an SBA backed loan that depending on their current options can be super favorable, 5-10% money down, depends on the buyer too. But so where a buyer can step into a business and use that kind of financing versus, there weren't a lot of individual buyers who could throw in, $1 million to go acquire an app. So pretty limited on the buyer side for that. Back in February 2020, we closed what I'm pretty sure was the first app deal ever done with SBA financing. It's a 7-figure app deal. Buyer for it was a super nice guy. He owned some real estate, but he had to jump through a ton of hoops, like, blood work, business plan, stuff I'd never seen for an app acquisition before. And the seller had to provide more info for underwriting than we'd ever seen before. Also, super level of details with the financials and bank statements and stuff. But we all worked through it and got it.
That was 2020. That was the first SBA financing deal for an app deal.
Yep. Exactly. We've done it a few times for e-commerce stuff, but not for apps. It was one of the strangest days. It was like February 2020. I was sick with what, looking back now, was definitely COVID. Like had all the symptoms. So on closing day, we're closing this $1.2 million deal, and I'm curled up on my couch, shaking with a fever, but sending out an email to the team saying congratulations. So it was a good sick day, but
making history from the fetal position on the couch, closing the first SBA deal in the app industry. And so since 2020, how's that shaken out with financing? Maybe if you could talk about kind of what's happened since then and where we are today with financing availability for these deals, because there's so many people who are interested in this space now. Like there's been this absolute explosion since COVID, right? Especially during COVID when people were stuck at home, people were looking at online deals, that kind of thing. I know you were really busy during that period. So what has happened to the financing picture since then, and where are we now?
Yeah, definitely definitely that time frame kind of really increased people's attention on digital assets and power in owning digital assets. Things like apps where it's super high margin in general. The financing stuff. So there's a great options for e-commerce. There's things like Boopos, although I think they recently put a pause on funding for a while. Other groups like eCommerce Lending. We work with Dan Callis at Fully Fundable. A bunch of other people who can do get SBA funding for e-commerce style businesses. And then there's also e-commerce growth funding things like clearbank.com, or for SaaS, there's like SaaS Capital, Lighter Capital. For apps, there's a few cash flow funding sources now but that's just for sellers that are looking to grow, not for acquisition. So things like Pollen.vc, GetBravo.com. But other than that, it's still pretty much a scenario where people have needed to have angel investors or, go with the route of like incubator accelerator stuff if they're a startup. Things like Techstars, AngelPad, Y Combinator, or VCs if it fits for that. I don't know anybody that's done it. I've heard some people have used crowdfunding for initial app capital. Haven't had anybody use that for like any acquisition stuff though. So unfortunately, there's still not a ton of great resources for app acquisition financing, unless you're doing larger deals where then people can tap into commercial lending. Those usually have their own constraints in terms of the financials for the business. Like we have some acquirers right now where if it's anything that's on even like a 10% year-over-year decline, they can't do it. So really tight criteria for that. And then with SBA, we're still getting some deals done with that. It just has to be a U.S. seller and a U.S. buyer. It's got to have enough history behind it, and then clean financials, tax returns. So far, we've only been able to get it done for subscription-based apps. I think the banks view those much more like SaaS businesses, where they're confident to some degree that there'll be some tail of subscription revenue that comes in, kind of no matter what the new with it. So, but as of right now, majority are still using cash, either their owner investors. Like we're doing a $13 million deal right now that's in due diligence where it's 60% cash from investors, then 40% stock, and then have a $40 million deal in motion that'll be 50% cash from investors through a family fund, and then a mix of earnout and seller financing. But I think historically, these lenders that do other deals, like Main Street businesses or SaaS or eCom, they viewed apps as like not having as much longevity. And most apps are B2C, not B2B, with contracts or things like that. Some of the niches have pretty low barrier to entry for competition, so someone can come in and compete. And then I think on like a more investment banker side of things, look at it, there hasn't been a huge volume of transactions or deal values in general. So they've probably focused their effort more, like I said, on Main Street businesses, e-commerce, SaaS, those kind of things. So, but I think right now it's a huge opportunity for someone to be able to go create a business or a bank that funds app deals. Especially
before we get into like the going forward opportunity, just on what you think, you've been doing this for a while, obviously. So everything you just ran through is a lot of information. But I'll circle up with you and we can put all of that in the show notes. Or if you have a one pager or something, maybe we could get that on your site and just financing options for acquirers in the space. But you mentioned commercial deals, right? I mean, the commercial lending, like that becomes available at a certain size. If you had to just kind of bogey what that size is, if you're looking at app deals, when does that come into play?
Yeah, so far, all of the people that have been doing those have been doing like 7-figure plus deals. So $1 million or more. And most of them have been, I think the last couple we did were like 4 million, 3.5 million, 2.2 million. So really more volume, of the $2 million and up kind of range. So
and so if someone's looking at an app that's just kind of like free and they've got the in-app transactions and they want to change it to a subscription, that financing isn't available regardless of their game plan.
Oh yeah, currently, yeah. If it was just like, if it's advertising-based revenue, something like that, or like you said, free. If they have subscription-based revenue, for sure, then at least explore that option.
Yeah, and you mentioned, if there's anything like a 10% decrease in revenues, they're gonna run for the hills. But like so many of these things, like these apps, I mean, what percentage of apps? It's something like 90% plus are just dead, right? I mean, they launch, they're on your phone and they're just never open. So I imagine there are a lot of those assets just out there kind of available, but they're not showing that historical growth that a lender would want to see. What's happening with the ocean of apps that are just sitting out there, the walking dead apps?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see on our end more smaller acquirers. They're not exactly aggregators, but people that are smaller investor groups where they're coming in and they're looking very selectively for apps where maybe it has been a declining asset and they can come in and do somewhat of a turnaround. Usually they're looking for stuff that still has, a current baseline. So maybe had a year-over-year decline, but the current month-over-month is pretty flat, where they can come in and improve it, whether it's through PD user acquisition or monetization, typically the couple big levers that people look at. So
yeah. And so, I mean, you've been at this for 18 plus years. I mean, you've got that active Rolodex. You're working with those acquirers. You have kind of the distressed acquirers alongside the traditional acquirers. You're working with them regularly, right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So based on all of your experience and everything you just went through, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity, but where does this go going forward? What do you see in terms of the opportunity and maybe someone stepping in and filling the gap with financing in this space? Because there's so much interest in acquiring online assets and there's so much activity, but like you said, it doesn't have that traditional deal volume that, other areas in M&A have. What's your take on this landscape going forward?
Yeah, I think there's definitely opportunity for someone to, whether it's a business or a bank that does acquisition financing for some of these smaller app deal values, especially because some of the buyers that would pick them up are experienced to some degree with apps. So, not necessarily for, a person who's never done anything in the app space, where banks might see that as a little more risk, but for the people that have experience in the industry and are looking for extra capital to be able to go do deals where they can probably show a good business case that they'll be able to keep it going and grow it with their expertise and knowledge if they have the capital to acquire it. And in the trends in general we've been seeing recently is that there's some buyers right now that they're acquiring apps and then adding AI type functionality to them. So some people doing that stuff with like fitness and health apps, and then seeing some people that are pretty creative with machine learning and AI where they're using it to optimize things. So like user acquisition, ad channels, ad creatives, the app onboarding, and user process stuff and support. So there's definitely some great opportunities for people to acquire apps, improve them, even if they don't use AI, because most app users leave some really good low-hanging fruit because they just focus on usually one or two ways to market and then one monetization method, don't really test much out. So yeah,
interesting. Yeah, it seems like that'd be a good opportunity for these funds that, if you've got a capable operator, you have so many people who want to get into the space but don't have the experience necessarily to do it, or if they're doing it, maybe they don't have the experience to make it actually work out. Have you seen a lot of these funds just backing established operators and people trying to get out of the public markets and put their money into something like this? Or has that been a trend?
Oh yeah, definitely a trend. We got a couple of our past AppSeller clients now who they've gotten some backing from like family funds to go and do these kind of deals. So one that just got like $50 million worth of capital lined up to do that. So I think the opportunity is there. Some of them, like so far, like I said, it's been mostly where they're doing it with somewhat experienced operators. They're going to go in and take it over and have a whole plan behind it. But
yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Because you have so many, I'm surprised there's no real established platform for this, right? Something that's really clicking, because you've got, the interest is there, and there are all these other platforms popping up, like, from a macro trend, you're saying private equity is going to be looking more towards the retail investor to raise these funds because that's where all the money is, and everyone's in the public markets. And anybody who's been sitting in S&P index for the past 10 years has quadrupled their money, and they're looking to diversify. They're looking to get out. And, how do you do that? How do you access the private markets? Maybe you're savvy enough to start a family office, but really that's not hitting the retail investor, right? And so, they say it's like 90% of the capital is chasing 10% of the opportunities when you're talking about the public markets, but you've got 10% of the capital really chasing 90% of the opportunities, which is really like private markets, lower middle market. And this is exactly that, right? You've got all the interest, but you don't have the vehicles to finance that, to take that money from, the public point A to private point B. Super interesting, because you've definitely lined up. You went through pretty much all of the available financing routes for an acquirer who's going to do this. And that's it.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely a whole market opportunity for someone. So if anyone's interested in creating that, investing in, or being a part of it, reach out to me.
Reach out to me too. I want to know. That's an interesting space. All right. Well, that's super informative. If you don't mind, I am going to track you down to make sure we go through all of those resources you just listed. We kind of put them in the show notes or get them into a nice document for you if you want to take them to your website. How can people get a hold of you if they want to chat, if they want to acquire a deal, if they have an app or an online asset that they're thinking of selling? What's the best contact info for you?
Oh yeah, best is me. Just start me a website. So AppBusinessBrokers.com, and you can contact me there, or email is just Eric, ERIC at AppBusinessBrokers.com. Perfect.
All right, Eric. Well, thanks for coming back for the second round. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks again. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for listening. So if you're not familiar with BizNexus, please be sure to check us out at biznexus.com. We have multiple solutions for business acquisition. For do-it-yourselfers, we have an approved access-only marketplace with thousands of acquisition opportunities that's updated daily. We usually have about 20,000 active acquisition opportunities in the marketplace at any given time. We also have our community where you can network with people probably just like the one you listen to on the podcast and search by keyword for potential niche partners or members of your deal team, or just let the AI overlap suggestions take care of that for you. And the really innovative solution that we've been working on, where we're spending most of our time these days, has to be OmniSource, and that's a deal sourcing platform built for teams. We built that for corporate development teams, family offices, and private equity groups, and it combines all of the on-market and off-market targets for your mandate into one streamlined, stupid simple experience. We're currently helping to deploy over $6 billion in committed capital between our partner and concierge members on that platform, but we have been opening that up more to individual repeat acquirers and should keep going in that direction as we move into 2025. So if you're interested in a demo, you can schedule that directly from BizNexus for the top right hand of the site, biznexus.com, or visit omnisource.ai and schedule a demo from there. We're just kicking this podcast thing back up and we're shaking the rust off a bit. So if you like what you just heard, please, again, spread the word, give us a review or some stars so we can feel good about putting more effort into the content going forward. That's it for the promotion. Thanks again for listening.